Standard tools migrate standard environments. Your environment is not standard. In earlier videos in this series, we covered the architecture and compliance work that has to happen before migration starts. This video covers what happens when the migration itself exceeds what any commercial tool can handle, and why discovering that during the migration rather than before it is a scoping failure, not a tool failure. Most SharePoint migration scopes are finalized before anyone asked what the migration tool cannot do. Every commercial tool has a supported features matrix, lists, libraries, standard content types, basic permissions, file metadata. For environments that stayed close to out-of-the-box SharePoint, the tools cover the scope. For environments that were heavily customized, and most enterprise SharePoint environments that have been running for 7 or more years were, the tools handle 80% of the content and leave the other 20% to custom engineering. That 20% is almost always the 20% the business cares most about. The critical business processes, the complex workflows, the customized forms the whole department runs on every day. Identifying these scenarios in the discovery phase, before a tool is selected and before the timeline is committed, is the difference between a migration that delivers and one that slips. 4 scenarios push a migration past what standard tools handle. Each requires a different engineering approach. First, SharePoint Designer workflows. SPD workflows cannot run in SharePoint Online. The platform they run on does not exist in the destination. Every SPD workflow in the source environment has to be rebuilt in Power Automate before the content it manages can move. This is not a migration task. It is an application rebuild task. A 3-step SPD approval workflow takes a day to rebuild. A complex, multi-condition workflow with external system calls and custom task forms may take 2 weeks. The migration timeline must account for the full rebuild inventory before the first content batch moves. Second, custom web parts and farm solutions. SharePoint on-premises supported full trust farm solutions, custom .NET code deployed at the farm level that could do anything the SharePoint API allowed. SharePoint Online has no equivalent. Farm solutions do not migrate. They have to be rebuilt as SharePoint framework extensions, Power Apps, or Azure hosted applications. The scoping question: how many farm solutions exist? What do they do? And what is the SharePoint Online equivalent? Some are straightforward SPFX rebuilds. Others require a complete different architectural approach. Third, complex metadata and content type dependencies. Environments with sophisticated content type hierarchies, site column inheritance across site collections, and managed metadata configurations that span multiple site collections require engineering work to reproduce correctly in the destination. Standard migration tools move content. They do not always move the content type architecture that governs it. When a content type is defined at the content type hub and inherited across 50 site collections, the migration has to reproduce that governance structure before content that depends on it moves. This requires PnP, PowerShell provisioning templates, or custom scripting, not a commercial migration tool configured through a UI. Fourth, large-scale external data connections. SharePoint environments that use business connectivity services to surface data from external databases or line of business applications have a dependency with no direct equivalent in SharePoint Online. BCS is not supported in the same form in SharePoint Online. The architectural question is whether the external data connection is reproduced through Power Apps, a custom SharePoint web part backed by an Azure API, or a different integration pattern entirely. SPD workflows, farm solutions, complex content type architecture, BCS connection. 4 scenarios that push past what standard tools handle. The scoping assessment has to identify all 4 before the migration tool is selected and before the timeline is committed. A migration that discovers any of these scenarios after the tool is configured and the first batch is queued will slip. The engineering scope belongs in discovery, not in remediation. In the next video in this series, we cover the governance architecture required when Power Platform scales beyond the departmental level.